some of the challenges of how one responds. On one hand, if we're going to be caring people, we cannot be without feeling for all those people being reunited with their families. And it's a tremendous joy for these people coming out of concentration camps, coming out of torture, coming out of horrific situations to come out. And that is without question a feeling of relief for these families. And the challenge is on many, many different levels. First and foremost is really the question that what happens next? Where do we go from here? If there was a clear path going forward, I think people would feel better about it. But because there's not a clear vision of the future, of what the day after looks like, what the end result will be, so that is a reason for people's, I don't want to use the word ambivalence, but people's fears, people's worries and concerns about this situation. We had given a class early on about the halachic parameters for releasing hostages and for paying ransoms. An interesting note as an aside, America has very strict rules on the books against negotiating with terrorists. There's a differentiation in American law between negotiating with rogue governments that take hostages for political purposes and terrorist organizations. America, according to their laws, are not allowed to give any benefit to a terrorist group for the exchange of hostages. They're not allowed to give them any benefit. Now, this doesn't mean this law isn't broken, but it is a law in the books in America. So what Israel in general has to think about is what is best for Israel. And because so many people in Israel right now just want to get some of the people out, and they don't see much progress going forward in Gaza, so therefore the mood in Israel is, let's do what we can. I'm not saying this is the mood of everybody, but it's a general mood in the street. In addition, there was incentive here from America, from both administrations, to be able to make a deal, to be able to have a deal done, even though America would never do a deal like this for themselves. America, according to law, cannot do a deal like this for themselves. If terrorists had kidnapped Americans into Mexico, wherever it was, they would not allow terrorists to be released from prison for it. I'm not saying there haven't been exceptions to the rule with the Taliban and others, but it's always been done in a very, roundabout way, not directly, but because it's circumventing the law of the United States. But I want to go back to Jewish law for a moment. The challenge is that people quote all the time these famous quotes from the Torah and from the sages that the greatest mitzvah is to release hostages. The challenge is that this is not, and this we gave a class on, but this is not our grandparents' hostages. In the sense of, in olden days, pirates or others would kidnap for either slavery or for ransom. It was a financial conversation. And even there was debate about, are you making incentive for other people to kidnap? However, it is not just a question of prisoners of war. This was a weapon of war. That what Hamas wanted to do was to be able to kidnap prison soldiers, Jews, individuals, in order to be able to continue to kill Jews. That is their whole reason for doing it, that they should be able to survive and kill more. So it is now, the kidnapping of hostages is an act of war, and giving them up, the hostages, by releasing terrorists who are going to kill and kill again is highly problematic, and it doesn't fit into the paradigms of the Jewish tradition of releasing kidnapped victims, people who are held ransom, but rather it fits more into the question of saving lives and endangering lives. And it's much more complicated. And again, you could go back and look at our class, which is online on YouTube, which I think held up well. But I want to jump in a little bit just to deal with being able to feel the empathy and the pain and even the anger from all sides without of the Jewish people, without necessarily dictating which way things should go. Things are moving in a certain direction. So I want to share a few stories from this week's Torah portion that help illuminate some of the issues going on. So what we find is in this week's Torah portion that one of the first things that happens as Moses becomes an adult, it says Moses grew up and he went out to his brothers and he saw an Egyptian man striking a Hebrew man of his brothers. So Moses is raised in the palace. He's protected. He's safe. But he endangers himself. He goes and he collaborates, or rather he kills. He looks to and fro and sees there's no man. And he struck the Egyptian and kills him and hides him in the sand. In other words, he sees someone beating a slave, a Jewish slave, from his brothers. He sees them as a brother. So number one is Moses in the king's palace, in a place where he's removed from the Jewish people. He sees himself as one of their brethren. That's number one message, how we're supposed to see ourselves. These are our brothers, and to stand up for each other. And what happens, though, the response is not beautiful to Moses. What happens the next day, he sees two Hebrew men were quarreling. According to tradition, they are the same two men. One of them is one of the guys who had been beaten by the Egyptian. He had actually saved this man's life. That's how the man had known that Moses had killed the Egyptian. He sees them fighting. He says, "Why are you going to strike your fellow?" And the other guy said, "Who died and made you boss? Who made you a man, a prince, a judge over us? Do you want to kill me as you killed the Egyptians?" Moses became frightened and said, "Indeed, the matter has become known." So the simple meaning of the text is the matter has become known that I killed the Egyptian and my life is in danger. But another interpretation is if the Jewish people can't get along with each other and they're attacking, they're willing to gossip and they're willing to collaborate with the enemy, we're in trouble. If this man is willing to tell on me, so to speak, and is gossiping among one another, it's a frightening situation. So the deeper meaning of the text would mean that. So Pharaoh hears about it somehow. In other words, someone does rat him out. And he wants to kill Moses, and Moses flees. And so what is the next stage of Moses' development? He enters Midian, and he sees that the shepherds are not treating Jethro's daughters very nicely. They drive them away, and Moses rescues them. So Moses' first reaction when he sees a brother being beaten, a slave, a Jew, he stands up. Now he's a stranger in a strange land, and he again stands up for the innocent. He's not a bystander. He rescues them and waters their flocks. So then the story continues. Moses ends up becoming part of the family, marrying Zipporah. And God here, it says in those days, verse 23, the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed from the labor, and they cried out, and the cry ascended to God from the labor. God heard their cry. And the belief here is that we do have to cry out. At times we have to pray, and our prayers can be answered. That's one of the messages here. I'm sorry, I pressed 2. Here we are. So what happens is in the next scene is that Moses is pasturing the flocks of Jethro. And according to the Midrash, he follows a little sheep that gets lost. And he follows that little sheep who's looking for water, this little lamb, and he follows it into the desert. So our sages say, based on the earlier 2 stories, and this is similar to a story told about King David and others, that God judges the shepherds of our people, how they shepherd the flocks of sheep, and that he cared about the individual sheep, just like he cared about the strange girls in a strange land, and just like he cared about his brothers. Moses is a caring person. This is a core of what it means to be a leader. And he doesn't always get the proper respect for that. what happens? An angel appears to him in a thorn bush. And our sages say, why a thorn bush? Because God is sending a message. I am with you in your suffering. Your suffering does not happen alone. God says, I, so to speak, feel it. I am with you in exile. I haven't forgotten you. I am not removed, gazing from on high, even though the biblical verse before said God remembered. And the idea of remembrance is seen as being God focusing on it and choosing to do something about it instead of leaving it, so to speak, in his subconscious, so to speak. In other words, God always knows. So what does it mean to remember? To choose to act on it. So an action is about to happen, but he's showing that he's in the thorn bush. So here's another interesting line, is that he goes, God says, I've heard their cry, go down to Pharaoh. And Moses asks God, behold, I come to the children of Israel. I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? So verse 14 says, God said to Moses, Ekya asher ekya. I will be what I will be. So there's a double I will be. I will be that which I will be. And then God says, and he said, so shall you say to the children of Israel, Ekya, I will be, has sent me to you. Wait a second. The first half of the verse says, I will be what I will be. Then he says, but tell the children of Israel, Ekya sent me to you. Now, based on other little hints in the rest of this Torah portion, where Moses is basically pushing back about many different issues that God is telling him to be a messenger. So one of the interpretations here that Rashi quotes is that God said to Moses, tell the Jewish people, I will be with them in this exile, just as I will be with them in the future exiles. And Moses responds to God. It's not in the text, it's a subtext. What do you mean? Whether it's in thought or in speech, God reads thought. What do you mean there'll be future exiles after this? Is this not enough to have the exile that we're in now? You want to burden them with thinking that there's going to be a future, there'll be more problems, there'll be more exiles, more destruction? And God agrees. Just tell them I will be with them in this exile. I will take them out. So this is another little hint, a little point that there is a challenge, that we don't want to see the future at times of more suffering, which is one of the challenges where people are thinking, let's take what we can when it comes to making a deal right now with what's being offered, and the opportunity to get some people out. So I'm going to take this a little bit further. God tells them in verse 16, go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord God, your forefathers appeared to me. But what you see later on in the text, and he tells the elders in verse 18, you shall come, you and the elders, to the king of Egypt. And you shall say to him, the Lord God of the Hebrews happened upon us, and we have to go for 3 days in the desert. So he tells them that the elders should come. But what happens is, when the story actually happens, the elders are not there. The elders are not, and if you look in the biblical text, they don't show up at the showdown in Pharaoh's palace. According to tradition, they melted away. They weren't able to they didn't have the bravery or the strength. According to tradition, it's going to be the Jewish taskmasters that were placed upon the Jews by the Egyptians, who would get beaten every day when the Jews did not do their proper share. Those were the ones that would ultimately become the elders, because they put their backs, they got punished, and they stood up for the Jewish people. But that's a later development. So I'll go a little bit further. Moses says, behold, they will not believe in me, and will not heed my voice. And they will say, the Lord has not appeared to you. So what does God tell him? Take your staff, throw it on the ground, it becomes a snake. Then he tells him, and then he tells him to grab it again, it becomes a staff. Then he tells him, take your hand and put them in your bosom, and it becomes white with leprosy. Both the snake and leprosy are symbols of speaking ill of others. When Miriam speaks ill of Moses later on, she gets stricken with leprosy. The word leprosy in Hebrew, metzora, a leprous person, comes from the word motira, someone who gossips, someone who tells tales, someone who says negative things is seen. So Moses is being rebuked here by God. Your job is not to say the Jews won't believe in me. They will heed my voice. In other words, a leader's job is not to attack the people, but to protect them to God. So we have to be very careful about speaking harshly about the Jewish people. And this is a rule even for Moses, how much more so for us, how careful we have to be in times in particular of distress, how careful we have to be not to speak in a negative way about Jewish people. So right now in Israel, you have people on two sides of the fence, each one, some saying, look at the benefit of getting out these 33, most of them alive, captives, hostages, and others saying, look at all the loss that will come in the future. You let out for the Shalit deal 1,000 terrorists, and you got, October 7th. What will be if you allow this to happen and you send these terrorists to the West Bank, and if you send them to other places? But the challenge is not to condemn either side. To our job is to speak good of the Jewish people, although policy-wise, there may be truly positive directions that we should take. But I want to go a little bit further. I'm just talking about the importance of how we speak about one another. So then what happens is, there's more, of course. I'm just going to go a little bit further. God says to Moshe, tell Pharaoh, my firstborn son is Israel. So I say to you, send up my son that he will worship me, but if you refuse to send him out, behold, I'm going to slay your firstborn son. Now, just you should know, Egypt was not a democracy, right? Egypt is not a democracy. But there is a belief in nations having identity and having responsibility. If you don't want to have responsibility, you can leave. There are different ways in general that in most countries you can leave. So although the Gazans cannot necessarily leave where they are, but it is important to recognize that as a people and as a nation in general, this nation has been supporting this behavior, even though they've been brainwashed. It's true. But if you just look at the West Bank for a moment, and again, I'm not talking about what strategy should be, but a recognition, the whole biblical story recognizes, even before democracy, that nations have a responsibility based on their leaders. Even if it's a king like Pharaoh, there's a responsibility for all the people as well. If you look at the West Bank, Hamas is not under any coercion. The people are not under any coercion by Hamas. The PA rules. But Hamas is very popular, so popular that they would win over the last couple of years, and even more so after the terrorist attacks of October 7th, they would win a popular election. And that's why the PA is not allowed a popular election in who knows how many years. Because the people support this type of murder. And there's a support staff for it. It's not, even after all the horrific disaster that has befallen the people in Gaza, it has not necessarily changed totally the support that they still have despite the disaster. They've been raised with a perspective that if we could kill Jews, that is our victory, even if we suffer. And they've said this explicitly to leadership and many others, but you can't guarantee, of course, there are many innocents. That is true. In a time of war, there are many innocents. However, the cause of the war has to be recognized, of where it's coming from is from the enemies within that state that is causing it. You should do your best not to kill innocent people, but this other element, you also don't have to endanger your lives when these nations are rising up to eradicate you. Again, every one of these issues are a separate conversation. But I want to go a little bit further. What happens is the people believe, and then we have Moses comes to Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, forget it. You guys are lazy. And he makes it that much more difficult for the Jewish people. He said, until now, I would provide you with straw for your tasks. Everyone had a certain amount of work they had to do, the bricks. Now you're going to have to collect the stubble for the bricks and not miss the amount, have the same amount. So they made it that much harder for them. So let the labor fall heavy upon the men. Let them work at it, and let them not talk about false matters. The reason why you're lazy. So Pharaoh said to the taskmasters and the officers, Pharaoh said, I'm not giving you stubble. And the people went and had to collect it themselves. And what happened was they said, you're lazy, you're not providing, and you're being beaten. In other words, the servants, which are the officers of the children of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmen appointed over them, they were being beaten. In other words, the Jewish taskmasters or officers who were underneath the oppressors of Pharaoh, they're being beaten for their brother. They put their backs there. They are taking the brunt of the beating. But what happens is they meet Pharaoh and Moses and Aaron standing before them, and they said, may the Lord look upon you and judge. See, if you have brought us into a foul odor in the eyes of Pharaoh and the eyes of his servants, to place a sword at their hands to kill us. You made it worse. You gave Pharaoh the ability, because you said, let the people go, and now he's hurting us even more. You've placed the sword. So what does Moses say? He returns to God and says, oh Lord, why have you harmed this people? Why have you sent me? Since I've come to Pharaoh to speak your name, he has harmed his people, and you have not saved your people. So Moses here is standing up for the Jewish people. Moses is standing up to God, saying, God, it's not fair, it's not right. Why should they suffer? And I made it worse. I don't see it. And then God responds, beginning of next week's portion. Oh, this is still this week's portion, a few more verses. And this one last verse, he says, you'll see what I'll do to Pharaoh. With a mighty hand, he will send them out. In other words, he's going to force some of the Jewish people out, and he will drive them from the land. I want to do just a Haftorah for a second, then I want to open up for conversation. But you have this element where Moses is standing up to God, and Moses is expressing this defense of the Jewish people and this prayer to God. Lama harosa, why have you done evil? We need to have revealed good. Now, I want to go to the weekly Haftorah, the prophet of this week's, the prophet reading of this week. So it says here, look at verse 12. God promises, this is a vision of the Messiah, will come to pass on that day that the Lord shall gather from the flood of the river to the stream of Egypt, and you shall be gathered one by one, O children of Israel. And it shall come to pass on that day that a great shofar shall be sounded, and those lost in the lands of Ashur and exiled in the land of Egypt shall come, and they shall prostrate themselves before the Lord on the holy mount in Jerusalem. And then there is, let me stop here. This idea, the promise that God says that ultimately you will be gathered one by one, God will take us by our hand and bring us out, is the prophecy of this week's Haftorah. We'll get into more details in a moment. Let me stop the share here. Any thoughts just based on the Torah readings of the day about some of these competing values? Number one, as a leader, you got to take abuse. And Moses does take abuse. Number two, as a leader, you can't give abuse. There's been some sad and saddening and painful scenes where you had different people in authority who are responding to the pained cries of parents of hostages. And even though the people have to speak with respect to the authority, nevertheless, those in authority have to recognize their pain and where they're coming from. And it's a delicate balance. Number two, we do have to worry about individuals. We cannot be callous. The story of Moses tells us how we're supposed to be caring for the individuals. As a matter of fact, that makes him a leader. We don't say you can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. We're not dismissive of the pain of the individual. On the other hand, as a leader, you have an obligation to not just think about the immediate, but also to think about the future. And this is again part of the crux of the challenge. Any thoughts anyone want to share? I see someone asked a question. Yeah, I'm not sure who the people are, but all right. Unless someone's disturbing, I'm not sure. Okay. Any thoughts before we go further? Okay. Feel free to interject. I can't see if someone, raised their hand here. I want to go back for a second here. Okay. I want to share. Let me go back here. I'm going to share a different screen for a minute.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
Why was Moses, hi Heidi, why was Moses sent back to Egypt after he murdered the person and ran away?
God, to tell the Jewish people, we wouldn't consider murdered. He protected the life of the person who was being beaten to death by the taskmaster. So we'd call it killed. We wouldn't call it murdered.
Right, you're right. Sorry.
No, I'm just saying, just to be a little specific about it. But the point is, God sends him back in order to let the Jewish people know and Pharaoh know to let the people go. So what's interesting is he comes, it says in the Torah portion this week, he goes with Tzipporah and his children on the donkey, but then they get sent back. And the subtext is that, again, it's not explicitly in the text, but Aaron says, we have enough people suffering in slavery in Egypt. Why are you bringing your family here? Don't bring your family into this problem. So it's an interesting element there. In other words, not everyone has to be put into that same challenging situation there. But yeah, he goes down there and he risks his life as a messenger. Okay.
Thank you.
I want to share. Let me try that again because I have to share it the proper way. Share with sound and share with. So this is a story in this was in 1979. A Jewish reservist was captured. I think it was by Syria, not Egypt. It says here Egypt. But they exchanged these 70 prisoners. Now, there's a big difference between captives of war, which have a system of recognized universal system, versus hostages being taken by a genocidal terrorist organization. But even there's a question where you make an incentive for them to capture and to trade hostages for Jewish soldiers. Here we are.
Was gefunden bei Chevy. Und hat ihm die Gewalt herauslassen. Bei Chevy in Zatschiknegel. Bis wann ich mit dem Messgebiet nach Fettblech und 70 von Zatschiknegel. Begolli hat ihn gesagt, aber wie bald lassen die Gewänke in andere Brille. Und wie bald hat das Aid mit ihm gesprochen. Wenn hat sich nicht gekonnt rechnen, wie viel mit der Fahrer herauslassen. Von dieser Assyrin hat ihn das so getan. Beschaß mir sagt das in Teine. Und Rachmon el-Islam, jeder Rede verweitigt, und der hätte als Zipur, als sie eine Gewänke in anderen Wege befreien, seien wir befreit, 70, tracht bei sich, öfter das der Weg, und sie öfter in die Gewänke in anderen Wege, und Nefe, Schachas, Misrael, ich kiem Elamol, Arachas kam, bekam, es rät sich mehr nicht wegen 70. Hatten angesagt, die Räder und die Schreier in Eretz Akedisch und in Chutzlores sollt machen, als Schweig, wer der 70 sein. Adrabe, man soll machen, Simches wie Hilulis. Und wir wissen, dass da andere, was meise sibische Tiere, wenn sie das Sof mit Galle sein, bis wann es dann mit Galle gewinnt. Als zwischen unter die etliche und 70 gewinnt, a Timata halb. Und die, was seine dort nicht gewähnt bei Beis Assuri, wegen Unionim Shal Madikach, was viele wegen Unionen schon Mabekach hat Nechet angehalten, die Shiite, yearn Hanan, auf nicht noch geben sich in die Jumi von Terroristen. Ich dort gewähnt, Korif zu halb bettlich von 30, und die, was haben Befehl, sich vernommen, mit Unionen von Meise Hezbollah, bis Meise Hezbollah, was hat gekostet, die Forschis Mamosh. Eifse, das ist der richtige Tag mit der Time wie Chulu, was hat die davon gemacht, Assad? Da konnte ich Atchile sagen. Aber wie der Mais ist befehlt, und auf dem hat kein Brede nicht mit der Time in Pschuten, Zahlen im Kmus wie Chulu, muss nach Riesel, nach Monil Islam, nach Ratschen, was sagt befehlt, auch halte welche Leid heuer ist hier. Das am meisten, was wir können, haben zurück. Die Etliche und 17 gefühlen sich bekopft und gefühlen sich in dem Mord, was Rahman al-Islam heuer Lissie, wir setzen nicht gesehen, bevor sollen sich nicht mit Stadel sein, noch einmal heuer Lissie. Komur, in Friedrich ist wahr, dass wir Charles Rahman al-Islam mich speit. Und weiß, dass sie gespiegen im Pfanne. Sagt mir in einer zweiten, dass Gishmi Broche. Und heißt soll machen a Broche, der Teva Ameti, nicht a Broche Befehl, machen a Bankett und machen a Maseltov, soll tanzen in die Gassen. Und nur wegen vorne mit allen Sachen, was sind damit verbunden.
So, I just want to be able to close that. Sorry. Okay. Just to go back for a second. You know, the issue is that at the core, God has done tremendous miracles for the Jewish people. We are living in a time where it was said it's not possible for Israel to fight against Hezbollah because they will rain down 100,000 rockets on every part of Israel, overwhelm the Iron Dome. Thank God Israel had done preemptive work, but everyone walked in their proper path. Hezbollah, Nasrallah, Iran, everyone just kept on going and doing, falling exactly into place. Everything working incredibly. There's no question, and you could hear this not even between the lines, but there are miracles upon miracles coming from top leaders in Israel. Gallant and others have said it openly. Tremendous miracles where everything worked perfectly, dropping bomb after bomb in the proper place, things exploding, things not being found. Hezbollah decimated. I mean, miracles. And then Syria folded in and of itself. There's no question Turkey didn't expect it. The Sunnis didn't expect it. For whatever reason, Russia and Iran did not go forward. Iran, we know why, but Russia didn't. It could have. There are many, many, many variables that all of a sudden now Israel put itself in position where it's able to protect itself from Syria in a way it hasn't been able to do in years. This doesn't mean there aren't new risks. Turkey is a risk on the horizon. It's possible Turkey will become the new Iran, and when Iran collapses, Iran will become the old Turkey or the old Iran, which is favorable to Israel. There are all sorts of unintended consequences. However, in the immediate right now, Israel has been saved from an existential threat that was posed by Iran and by Hezbollah. There's no question. And right now, Iran is weaker and open and naked and can be taken out, the nuclear facilities, if there's American will for it. It's very possible that the reason why Netanyahu is going for this deal, Trump wanted it very badly. He wanted to win. And there's no question they're making deals. It's very possible. He said, look, give us this will. You don't have a day after plan anyway in Gaza. And sooner or later, you're going to have to stop what you're doing. You're just losing soldiers. You don't really have an end game. So we'll help you take out Iran if need be. And this is the deal. In other words, again, we can't know. It's not going to know till later, but both Biden and Trump, but Trump for sure wanted this. And there was a benefit for him. And it doesn't mean, don't get me wrong, I don't believe, as you could tell, that this is necessarily the wisest decision. On the other hand, we can understand why people want it, why people are desperate for it. The Rebbe's point is every heart breaks for one captive, but when you release there were terrorists who were involved in deadly attacks. They themselves didn't pull the trigger. Now we're talking about hundreds of terrorists, hardened terrorists. We know what happened last time with the Shalit deal, 1,000 released, including Sinwar, which caused this whole October 7th, Many captives would rather kill themselves than cause this much suffering and death to others, God forbid. On the other hand, the fact is, Israel is not planning. We don't see a day after plan. Israel's not willing to reoccupy the border area and make a serious zone there and give incentives for the Gazans to leave. That's not happening right now. That's the reality. So the question would become from what should be a policy from a Jewish law point of view. The importance of the Israeli government is to protect its people. And right now, a Palestinian state or any authority run by the Palestinians is a danger to lives and limbs of millions of Jews in Israel. That's the reality. The point is, Israel doesn't want to reoccupy. And I'm not getting into should there be settlements or not. That's really a question of security. Is it more secure to put in settlements again in Gaza? Or is it more secure to make a demilitarized zone? But the question has to be safety and security. It's not about the rights of the people that live there as far as their right to try to have a state. There are many Arab states, they're all failed, or they're dictatorships, or they're monarchies where there is no individual rights. In other words, this idea that they need another Arab state to be a failed state is absurd. Let's see what we're going to get out of Syria. We know what we got out of Yemen. We know what we got out of Libya. Jordan's at the cusp of collapsing. Jordan is 70, 80, 90% Palestinian, depending on how you count. And it's being run by a Bedouin king who is known as the last king of Jordan. The Middle East is at the cusp of tremendous change. There is no way this kingdom continues in Jordan. Will it be a Sunni, radical, Salafi, Islamic terrorist state? That's very possible. The Syrians who were there, they haven't changed their spots. The Al-Qaeda and ISIS crowd. They may be acting that way, but as soon as the wind blows another way, they could change back just as easily. This is not an integral change based on some sort of conversion on the road to Damascus, that they had an epiphany. There's no road to Damascus here that made them change. If I'm mixing in other religions, the Muslims won't be happy, the Jews won't be happy. But the point is, there's no great epiphany and change here. It's right now tactical. So what will be? And Israel, in other words, can't rely on the kindness, not of strangers and not of their neighbors. Israel has to protect itself, which means right now Saudi Arabia will or won't make a peace deal. But we saw, they'll stab us in the back in a minute. The fact is, the Salafi terrorists for the last 50 years have been supported by Saudi Arabia, not just Qatar. That's who started all the support of all the radical Sunni terrorists in order that they shouldn't come after them and they're into Saudi Arabia. And we see what Qatar is doing openly. But these winds can change. The prince of Saudi Arabia could change tomorrow. He could be killed. And then what will be? You can't have armies, foreign armies in Gaza. Israel has to have control of its own border, or it has to be a recognized state that you have deterrent ability against. Egypt, you can have deterrence against. It has what to lose. You don't have deterrence against Hamas. What are you going to do? Kill more of them? They'll get a few more members. They already got as many members as they lost, probably. The only thing they're afraid of is losing territory. You have to take it away and it has to be irrevocable. That's the reality. Again, it's not happening right now. Israel's not in this place right now. That's not where they are. That's not where the mindset is. Israel has bigger things to worry about right now. The fact they've weakened Hamas and they'll control the borders to some degree is going to be enough, it seems, for Israel right now. There's a possibility they'll be in this stalemate for a long time to come. And sadly, it's possible many hostages will be stuck in Gaza. because this is only the first stage of 33 of them. And the others are going to be other stages once they make other further commitments, where Hamas is not losing and leaving its leadership of Gaza. You're going to end up with the same situation again. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to have the same power and same ability, but it's possible Israel's making peace or getting used to the idea that this may be the situation, to have a weakened Hamas on the borders. So if, in other words, when it comes to put it on one foot, the major responsibility from a Jewish point of view is protecting the lives by having secure borders and ability to deter the enemy. You need that. If you can't have that, you're going to have to make strategic depth in order to be able to protect yourself, whether it's by having a few miles into Gaza. But right now, Israel's giving that up right now, allowing the people to come back. So we're in a situation where this is not ideal. On the other hand, we can't close our hearts for all those who have been wounded, injured, disfigured, killed, murdered, brutalized, and those who are right now hostages. In other words, it's this challenge that exists right now. So for us as being caring people, we have to have that. On the other hand, we have to recognize, the Rebbe once said, it's akin to doing a surgery and the doctors say, this is a big job and to cause them a lot of pain, let's sew them up and do a second surgery. And they sew them up and they do a second, then they close them up. Once it's open, you could already take out the cancers. You could take out the issues. Instead, you're doing a little operation, sewing it back up, and doing the same operation over and over and over and over again. Israel's been doing this in Gaza now for months, over and over in the same places, the same buildings, the same enemies coming back and doing it over and over again and losing soldiers. And each time they may be weakening and cutting the grass to some degree, but they haven't solidified their hold on this. It's not permanent. It's just temporary, to and fro. And they're doing the same operation over and over and over again. And we're opening this up right now. These freed terrorists are going to embolden the West Bank. We don't know what will happen. Iran is determined to help the West Bank be a light. And they're trying to send in all sorts of weapons. We don't know what will happen. The leader of the West Bank, of the PA, is very old right now. And there's nobody in the wings that's going to jump in and take over. The one they want is in the Israeli prison. We'll see if Israel releases him. So we have a situation where to jump in the streets and dance like it's the greatest celebration is unaware of and being deliberately unaware of the dangers that do exist. On the other hand, there's been great miracles. There's been wonderful miracles. Okay, I'll open it up. Any other thoughts? And then I'll just come back with a few other points. Feel free to disagree. Honestly, it's really, I don't want it to be just a monologue, but to have the sympathy and empathy for both sides. But realistically, we're in a situation here where we have not been able to structure what the future looks like. This is the challenge. And we've awoken, there has been awoken tremendous anti-Semitism all over the world. Any thoughts, Karen?
Yeah, Rabbi, we got to get those hostages out. All of the ones. It's
you're not getting all of them out.
Horrible. And it's something that I don't think that we can, no matter how bad we feel, and pray for them and hope, we can't understand.
Right, but we also can't understand all the hundreds of people who are murdered by those terrorists that were released for the last deal. In other words, we can't be blind to what's going to happen based on previous experience. There's no chance that these people are all going to go back and sing Kumbaya. If anything, the world's terrorism is increasing. It's not decreasing. This is an incentive. They're all calling this a victory. They're all saying we're going to redouble our efforts to kill Jews. This is what they're all saying. This is a sad reality. In other words, everyone you get out, you're getting out this way. There's a price to pay.
Right.
And this price is more dead Jews and more kidnapped Jews. That's the reality of the past. There's no question about that.
No, I
In other words,
understand, like when like if someone's kidnapped and you pay the kidnapper, then it's like you just make more people get kidnapped. I
but this
get
is much more, because
Right,
this
this
is
is
what
worse.
allows them to continue.
So
The
what are you
only
saying,
reason
that?
Hamas
So
was
what are you
able to
saying?
attack because they thought they could survive, and they're right. They attacked because they took the hostages. If they knew, like America had a policy and Israel had this policy through the 50s and 60s, we don't negotiate with terrorists. Israel has slowly, because it's an army of children and everyone's a parent and everyone's our child, the reality is that the mindset shifted tremendously. And once the doors open, they all feel, if you did it for everyone else, do it for my child. But the reality is you're causing more and more of this to happen. Right now, Iran is trying to get people kidnapped or killed like that all over the world. They're not just going to focus on Israel. It's going to be everywhere. We're not helping terrorism. We're promoting terrorism. This is the reality, the sad reality, the sad arithmetic that does exist with this. No,
What is the
I'm not
solution?
saying.
So wait, are
Yes.
you saying, like you were comparing it to surgery, and like they keep sewing it up and why not? So so they should just finish the job. Is
They
that
should empty. Listen, the fact is, Syria was emptied of a few million people. The fact is, many of these people want to leave Gaza. It was Egypt that was blocking them. Everywhere, all these people wanted, so many wanted to leave. Now, again, I'm not setting policy right now, and I'm not saying right now this is going to happen. It might happen the next war. What I mean to say is right now, every single Palestinian in Arab living in the Gaza has moved out of their homes. They've all been moving, but they're all moving in this small little landmass. They haven't been allowed to leave. Egypt closed the door. This is also a war crime, not to let refugees leave. You could have let them leave and left this at least a mile, a couple of miles of a buffer zone. But look, it's not happening right now. I'm not saying it's not happening. And I understand Israel's tired and Israel doesn't feel it has the goodwill to do that. And Israel doesn't want to be an occupying force. Israel did that already once. It left Gaza. It doesn't want to go back in. But it doesn't really have a choice ultimately. Ultimately, this is going to build up again. These people are not all of a sudden changing. Now, Iran could be weakened. Qatar could be weakened. All these things could weaken then the supporters of Hamas and make them less of a threat and all that. But there's a danger here that's already, that's fully there.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Okay, I want to go back for a second. Sorry. Any other thoughts before just to do an overview? Okay. There is a concept, and this is going back to the just to look at what's the unintended consequences that are happening right now. The natural allies of Hamas are Sunnis, not Shia. The Shiites in Iran, who are supporting Hezbollah and are supporting Yemen, the Houthis in Yemen, those are Shia. And in Iraq, the militias, Iraq was a majority Shia country, and the militias are Shia, many of them, and they're supported by Iran. Iran really runs Iraq as a puppet country. America pulled out of Iraq, and the reality is Iran took over. That's the reality. There's some level of still they're playing the game and they're careful somewhat with America, but in general, it's Shia militias and the Shia who are running Iraq at this time. But the majority of the Arab world are Sunni, and the majority of the Arab world, Hamas, is part of the Islamic Brotherhood, which is in Egypt, the center. The only country that allows Islamic Brotherhood to run for office is Israel. Israel has the Islamic Brotherhood in its Knesset, but members. But the point is, the father and mother of Hamas is the Islamic Brotherhood. And ISIS, Al Qaeda, all these people, their teachers, their mentors, going back from Saudi Arabia and others, are these Salafi Sunni radicals. Now, there is an incentive for some of these governments to try to survive. The governments understand that the Islamists who want an Islamic state will overrun them. There are challenges in all these countries, the ones that are stronger than others, such as Saudi Arabia. They were paying off bin Laden all those years. How many of the terrorists of 9/11 were Saudi Arabian? The vast majority was Saudi Arabian. And that's the reality. It's part of their culture. It's true right now they can put a fig leaf over it, but the internal change can shift in minutes. Let's go to Turkey. Turkey is not an Arab country. Turkey is an Islamic country, and Erdogan supports the Islamic Brotherhood, but also partially it's a political move for him as well. But he supports the Islamic Brotherhood. He has the Hamas members living in Turkey, protected in Turkey. He's never funded, as far as we know, terrorism against Israel, but he's been supporting it by supporting them just as Qatar has. So what we have here is a situation where even if it's not Hamas, just like Al Qaeda and ISIS, Al Nusra, they all replace one another, but the ideology doesn't go away so fast. Until there's a reformation in the Islamic world, it's not going to happen overnight. And you do not have a modernizing influence of alternative values. You have capitalistic monarchies who are trying to protect themselves, who think they'll have more tourism and more economy if they diversify the economy and they turn the whole Saudi Arabia into a big nightclub right now. But who says the Islamic fundamentalists are going to put up with that? Just because they're investing trillions of dollars in having American rappers show up there and buying sports teams and all these things to diversify, we don't know what it's going to be like. Israel can't rely on them. And God has given Israel tremendous miracles, able to protect and defend themselves. They are stronger now than ever. Now, it's true, the army is worn out. There are challenges with the Haredim, challenges with the issue of how many months reserves have to be there. People are exhausted. They need more, and they need to have arms from other places in order that they should not be in a position where they're beholden to America. They also are going to have to cut down some of the financial support they get from America in order to have a little more independence. These are all elements that have to take place. It's very possible this imperfect deal will allow Israel to further strengthen and develop. And that's what they're thinking. You know, we have bigger problems on the horizon, and we cut down Hamas to size, and we'll see where things will go. However, we will see where things will go is not really a policy, and this is the challenge, that people know this in Israel. This is why it's not huge dancing in the streets. People are crying and hugging each other without question, happy for the parents and the children who are coming out, but they understand. Deep down, everyone understands that you're not changing these murderers. You don't make a lion into a vegetarian by feeding him meat. You don't make a terrorist into a peacenik by giving him the hostages. All Hamas wanted to do was survive and get out prisoners, and that's what they're getting. And they're spinning it as victory. And it's not just them; it's the masses, the olam golam. The masses are asses. This is a reality. In particular, in cultures where they've promoted this as a value system from birth for a few generations, funded by UNRWA. The schools, the education has funded this idea that they're all victims and they have the right to kill innocent Jews in order to gain back their dignity. And it's not about a land. If you gave them the whole land of Israel, every bit of it, they'd be killing each other. We see it happening in Syria. We see it happening in Lebanon. We see it happening in Libya. We see it happening in Yemen. All these places. This is a challenge that they have to work on. It's an Arab problem. It's not a Jewish problem. The Jews have to make sure they have secure borders and they have deterrence against their enemies. Where are we right now? With God's help, God will protect us. God will continue to protect us, even if we don't always make the wisest decisions. But God should give the wisdom and the strength to our leaders to be able to make difficult choices. Because there's going to be, after this war ends, there's going to be a whole new cadre of leaders coming up from the army who were there. And they understand we can't keep going back. We can't keep sacrificing our lives. We're going to have to create deterrence. We're going to have to create buffer zones. We're going to have to be victorious in absolute ways where the Arab world sees that they lost and they see the cost of their loss. Right now, they don't mind human lives being lost. They say it themselves. Every extra civilian killed is a victory against Israel. Every one of our own, we have this recorded. They sent letters of this. Every one of our children dies. The blood is what allows us to be victorious over Israel. They're martyrs and they're useful. Every child dead for them of their own children is strategy. That's the reality of their leadership. It's not about the individual value of life that individuals may have. The culture and the leadership have this. So you're not going to deter them by killing more and more. You're going to have to take away control of the land, and you're going to have to take away control, and you're going to have to annex parts of territory, and you're going to have to make buffer zones. You're going to have aggressive hunting of leadership all the time. This is a reality for the next 10, 20 years. And the new leadership that's going to come to the fore in Israel is going to have a different take. Only thing is, we hope that they don't, the next couple of years, that Israel doesn't endanger itself more by giving up strategic gains that they've made with blood and treasure and life, and thousands of mutilated soldiers injured in ways, blinded, missing limbs, that we're not even getting the full scope of that. The scope is incredible. Israel has advanced its life-saving techniques in the field by bringing plasma, blood to the field, but they've also saved tremendous number of lives, but many more people who are wounded in ways and crippled in ways that it's going to transform the entire society. And this is aside for all the people who are traumatized. Everyone has somebody in their family they know who's been killed or kidnapped or injured, and they've all seen things. This is a traumatized nation right now. The question becomes where we go from here, and to go with love for one another and with accepting the understanding of, like what Karen said, that what Karen expressed, it's for sure the feeling of many. We have to get them out no matter what. It's our bond we have with our citizens. There's no question, there's a feeling of that. And others say you have a bond to protect the future lives of our citizens as well, but they don't have a name. The future victims don't have a name or face yet, so it's harder. But we have the facts. We know what's happened time and time again. So to end on a positive note, we believe God protects the Jewish people. We've seen miracles and wonders, and God should protect us even from our choices that are not 100% perfect, even for the ones that maybe do not express as much faith and strength that it should. But God should protect us no matter what, because like God says in this week's Torah portion, you're my firstborn son, Israel. And therefore, whoever touches me, the prophet says, whoever touches one of my children, it's like you put your finger in God's eye. That's what God says in the Torah. So this idea that we have to recognize it, but the world has to recognize it too. And with God's help, they will see it as well. But with God's help, we'll be able to be, it says, Hashem oz la'amo yitain, God should grant his people strength. And then we say, Hashem yivarech et amo b'shalom, God will bless his people with peace. So with God's help, we should have peace through strength, and not through endangering lives, not through giving up land for promises of peace, not for any sort of that emboldening of terrorism and emboldening of the enemies around us, but rather to restore deterrence with God's help. Any thoughts before we say goodnight?
Yes, Rabbi. I've been always concerned with a question: what do we have to be so generous with a terrorist? When we do that, prisoner swaps or hostages swaps. Why do we give up 30 or 50 or 1,000 bloody killers for
Right, we
one?
set the price. We have set this price by agreeing to it. If we didn't agree to it, it wouldn't be the price. If you gave 1,000 for one soldier, you just made the price. This is the reality. We made the price, and it's a problem. It's a problem. Israel's going to have to, after this war, if it doesn't want that any two-bit terrorist could bring the entire state of Israel to their knees, they are going to have to make a policy again, like they once had, of not negotiating with terrorists. The cost is too high. It's an incentive for terrorists to kill, not just to kidnap, because they know they could kill and survive as a terrorist group. They don't mind dying. They just have to survive as a terrorist group. And therefore, they will kidnap. You are making an incentive with our hands of kidnapping. We're doing it. By releasing these terrorists, we're making more young Palestinians believe they can have glory and victory by just kidnapping a Jew. Whether they kill the Jew or don't kill the Jew, they could survive if they kidnap enough of them. And that's what's happening right now. We're leaving Gaza. We're leaving them in control of Gaza for all intents and purposes. And we're not releasing all the hostages. We're releasing 33. Majority alive of the 33. Another 70. How many alive, how many dead is another conversation, but there's more there. These soldiers, the young men, we're not getting out, God forbid, based on what's happening now. Because if Israel is serious about not leaving Hamas in power, you can't square that circle. Hamas is staying in power. They're not letting those soldiers go unless they stay in power. Israel is saying, well, we're not going to let Hamas stay in power. That means these people are going to stay there. And Israel knows where many of these are, but they don't want to bomb there because they know they kill their own hostages. Their own Jewish citizens are being killed when they bomb in these areas. So these people are, their life is in danger, but by giving up more, you're creating incentive. See, here's the thing. I know we had a class on this, but one core idea. In the middle of a war, you don't give weapons to the enemy to hurt you. In the middle of a war is not a time for hostage exchange. We're not talking about prisoner of war exchange. This is the mode of the war is to be able to survive by keeping human shields of Jews that they kidnap. So you're perpetuating the war by giving them more prisoners. You're making an incentive. The war is not done. Now's not. I don't want to say it because it's already happening. So I want to be happy for the families. But for future, Israel's going to have to shift and change. And I believe many of those coming out of Gaza, who are the new voters and going to be the new people running for parliament, for Knesset, are going to have a different approach to what has to get done. They understand that every house had a Mein Kampf, every house in the north had weaponry, that this is not just civilians. These are civilians who have been brainwashed and committed to supporting so much of this horror. And that I'm not saying civilians should die, even if they support the horror. What I'm saying is know what this society is developing. Know what we are producing here and know what the future holds. It's not simple. It took a long time for the Reformation to impact Christian Europe. Islam has not had a Reformation like that. You've had top-down policy changes by people in Saudi Arabia or other countries. That does not a reformation and transformation of society make. We are not dealing with people who share these Jewish values about human life. And they're proud of it. We embrace death, they say. You embrace life. Checkmate. You can't get us, because what are you going to do? Kill us? We'll get more. We have many, many babies, all willing to die. As some people would raise their children to be doctors and lawyers, some raise them to be suicide bombers. They do. I'm not saying all, but enough do. And enough give lip service, even if they don't internally, even if the human motherly and fatherly instincts has not been extinguished by brainwashing, they still, because of societal pressure, will give vocal support for killing innocent people and blowing themselves up and causing the death of their own people for the sake of humiliating the Jewish people. All right, we have a question from Zooming Boomer. Who is Zooming Boomer?
Hey, Rabbi, it's Jack. How are you?
Hello, Jack, the Zooming Boomer.
Yeah, it's just very frustrating because it seems like there's this constant, they've been fighting a defensive war essentially for forever, it seems. Yeah, recently I guess Israel has gone on the offensive, but I don't think anyone has ever won a war playing defense. So I mean, it's a dilemma, but I think that after this, um, unless they want to just continue the way they have been, they're gonna have to change course somehow
Already,
in terms of their response to these sorts of
before the
things.
response, Jack, you're 100% right. And if you read what's coming out of Israel, even with what they did with Hamas and what they did with, with Hezbollah, not Hamas, but Hezbollah being very proactive and taking out whether the beepers and then Nasrallah and taking out, they had homing
Not
devices.
enough. It's not
I
enough.
know, no, I know, but the tactics of change in general is moving towards being more proactive and aggressive. Although all the old leadership in the army who've been doing defensive wars since the Yom Kippur War have been have are still in place. I'm saying over the next 10 years, it seems like they realize and they recognize that they have to be actively hunting terrorists and actively taking out challenges that may face them, even if it means becoming more of a pariah than they would like to be. They
They're
do
already,
recognize
yeah, but
long term, any society that wants to survive terrorism is going to end up supporting Israel. Maybe not right away, but they understand that Israel is not the cause of terrorism. It's the biggest lie that we have bought and that have been sold by different administrations in America, that somehow it's the existence of Israel. If Israel wasn't there, the Islamic Brotherhood would have reasons to kill each other. Shiite would be killing Sunni. Al Qaeda would be killing Al Nusra. The Sunnis be killing each other. This is it's without end until a society changes. Right now, they got into this situation, whether they're exporting to Europe. In short, Jack, I would say, hopefully, it looks like there is a movement towards going towards preemptive strikes again from Israel and not recognizing the self-inflicting borders and boundaries that we've done to ourselves. Now, this doesn't mean Israel's going to be carte blanche and do everything it could do at any moment, but it will be much quicker to take out dangerous. We will see what happens in the Trump administration when it comes to Iran. Iran, all of a sudden, Saudi Arabia is now playing nice and footsie with Iran. Why? Because Iran and Saudi Arabia and these countries, it's not like they all want Israel to be on top. None of them want Israel to be on top. So if a weakened Iran gives Saudi Arabia a little more room, it doesn't want too strong in Israel. It would like a weakened Israel with a Hamas gnawing at Israel's toes and in the West Bank, other Islamic jihadists just within control. We don't want that. And Israel's mindset is changing, but it's a process. It's a generation that's being raised right now in this crucible that recognizes that we're going to have to take a whole different approach. With God's help, I see that coming beneath the surface all over Israel. But again, I'm reading, from an outsider. But I don't think there's a choice because there's nobody on the other side to even pretend to make a peace deal with among these Islamists and the Palestinian states. I never heard of such a rumor. Al-Jolani, someone wrote Al-Jolani study with Chabad. I never heard such a thing. That's an interesting. Who's R? Who's R? Who's saying this? It's a joke? Nah. Yeah, he's an Al Qaeda terrorist. If anything, he's pretending to be reformed. Look, there's always what happens is the Muslims, the Shiites are claiming Jolani's a Jew. This is how it works. Whoever is the other side, they claim is a Jew. So, what do you call it again? I don't know. He studies 7 Noahide laws. I don't know. I am not going to rely on a transformation of a vampire and a zombie into a loving babysitter. I'm sorry. We are not letting any of them babysit our kids. I don't care. I don't care what they profess. You know who's babysitting my kids? My kids are babysitting my kids. You know who's babysitting the borders of Israel? Not America, not Trump, not Biden. It's going to have to be Israel. And Israel's going to have to recognize that. And I think for many, they do. And ultimately, it's best for America and best for the world. Ultimately, it's best even for the terrorists because it's not good for them to die. They should love life too, and they shouldn't want to die. So ultimately, there's deterrence that can be reasserted in many ways, and it's going to have to be done. And not just that, the funders. Iran is funding the Houthis. You have to hit Iran for it. The Houthis don't care to die. Iran cares to lose power. So you're going to have to take out the funders of terrorism. Same thing with Qatar. Playtime is over, and this is going to have to change. I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, but it's very possible. Next 10 years, supporters of terrorists will be treated like terrorists. And you're going to have to be preemptive. This is it. These are supporters. They have what to lose. How did the Houthis get all this advanced missiles? They're cavemen. They're cavemen. We provided in the fight Egypt and others, we provided sophisticated weaponry to them. And Iran continues to provide sophisticated weaponry to them. They don't have the know-how to keep on producing. We can cut off their sources. We can. And we can cut off their funders. We can. It has to be a will. Problem is, the will right now is not there internationally. We will see, piece by piece, it can be taken out. So with God's help, that's what will happen. Right now, it's a time when we have to daven. We have to be thankful for those who have come back. We have to daven that God should protect the Jewish people, and that the Jewish people should restore their deterrence and recognize that they can't keep giving incentives to the terrorists. But I'm with you, Jack. I feel the frustration, but I'm trying very hard, and I think it's important for all of us not to judge the Jewish people who are preaching, give up everything to get the hostages back, because it's coming from a place of caring and a place, even if it's a mistake.
Yeah,
so
no,
that's our challenge. Should be
I'm not judging.
empathetic.
I'm not judging, but I think a hard line has to be drawn after this deal is complete.
I hope so. I hope so, Jack. I
You
hope
know,
so. With God's help.
because it's not going to end. There'll be another event in the future.
No, we're telling them that it works. Iran already is looking. It was just now a businessman they tried to bring into to schlep into Qatar or wherever it was just now. They're trying to kidnap people. And you know what? We saw what happened in Argentina and other locations where they have people. This is not simple. There's a lot of Islamic groups. We don't know what America is coming down the pike. You have these radicalized people that may become more professionalized, God forbid. We have to be aware of them. And we can't be complacent about that. This doesn't mean we're at that situation, but anywhere in the world, Canada, all over, Europe, serious challenges. Yep, Europe is undergoing serious challenges. So look, ultimately, the free world, if it wants to stay free, is going to have to be willing to fight for it. And Israel has to fight for itself as well. But ultimately, those who want to survive, because really, really, many people do not want to be the slaves of the Islamic overlords, of Islamic fundamentalism. Many of them, many Arabs don't want to be. As a matter of fact, the Arabs in many of these Arab states say, Europe, you guys are too weak when it comes to how you deal with Islamic radicals, because the Islamic nationalists are the supporters of Islamic terrorists, and you let them all fester by allowing them to continue. And they say, we're tougher. We don't allow this in UAE and in Saudi Arabia right now, although they're the ones that created the Frankenstein, but right now in their own countries, they're much more repressive towards them. But in Europe, there are funding sources and terrorist groups that support all. Look, the guy who's going to say the benediction at Trump's inauguration, the Islamist mufti, is someone who couldn't call Hezbollah a terrorist organization. I mean, this stuff exists in America. We'll see where it goes. Till now, we've been safe, relatively. And with God's help, it should continue. But I think there's a wake-up call that Israel can't drop the ball. They're not going to drop the ball going forward, and they're not going to go back into their cocoon. All right. With God's help, we it should be in a way of peace. The enemies should have a wake-up call. They should recognize that this is not beneficial. And the fact is, if the Arab world collaborates with the free world against the terrorists for their own benefit of survival, because you can only feed them so much till they come and they eat their masters, there's hope. But they need it for themselves too. The Arab world also has to wake up. So there's many other elements going on. We're way beyond my hour. So everyone have a good night. Feel free to send me your emails about how the format should be and what topics for next week, Thursday. 7 to
Rabbi,
8
which
is the
email do
plan.
you prefer? Which email do you prefer? I think I have 3 of them for you.
All 3. No, anyone is fine. I get to see them all. Chabad@snet.net is my primary.
Okay.
Even though I send for email purposes rabbi@jewishoreline, that's because the system likes that better.
But you see that also if
Yeah, it all goes to my email.
Okay.
All right, everyone, have a very good night.
Thank you,
God should
Rabbi.
protect our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land. God should
Amen.
bring back all the hostages. God should put the fear of God into our enemies and cause the deterrence to come from on high. There are all sorts of changes that are happening, and with God's help, let the Syrians and others do tshuva. I'm looking forward to it, but I'm just not relying that the repentance sticks, but let them go for it. I am open to it. All right, let us say a prayer for our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land. All right, everyone, have a good night. Take
Amen.
care, everyone.
Good night. Thank you, Rabbi.
All right. Thank you.